Charles Beyl is, thank you everyone for coming, by the way. And we are in the Wonders Illustrated exhibition. And today we have Charles Beyl with us, who has two works on view. One piece from the Little Lunch Truck and the other from Scout, the Tugboat. Charles Beyl is an illustrator, children's book author, and artist based in Sugar Land, Texas. He studied fine art and graphic design at Washington State University and later went to graduate school at Syracuse University. For 20 years, his editorial cartoons appeared in Lancaster, Pennsylvania's Sunday News. From 1995 to 2015, Charles was a professor at Pennsylvania College of Art and Design in Lancaster. Now, when he is not in his studio, he teaches in the digital media department at University of Houston. His books, Little Lunch Truck and My Friend Ben Won't Share, were published in 2021, and Scout, the Mighty Tugboat was published in 2020. Charles, thank you so much for being here, and please take it away.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. Let me share my screen here. And so hopefully you're seeing this. What I'm going to do today is go through my standard slideshow and talk about my life as an author and illustrator and educator, and my path that I've taken to get to these places. And afterwards, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. So we can go ahead and get started. So this is me. My name is Charles Beyl. Beyl is a German name, and that is the German pronunciation. That's the way my dad pronounced it, my grandfather and great-grandfather pronounced it, so that's the way I pronounce it. If you use the English pronunciation, it is Beyl. But I will answer to both of them. My friends call me Charlie, so if you're my friend, you can call me Charlie. If you're my super, super, ultra secret close friend, you can call me Chuck. There's a very small group of people that call me that. So I call this Making a Life in Art, or How I Learned to Draw, Offend Mrs. Robinson, and Make Friends. So it all starts here in Clear Lake, Wisconsin. That was where my dad met my mom. My dad was a Navy aviator in World War II, and my mom was the daughter of a blacksmith in a little town called Amory, Wisconsin. My dad lived in Clear Lake, Wisconsin. So they're very close to each other. And after the war, they met at a dance party, and they started dating, and shortly thereafter they got married and they started having babies. That is my sister Becky. This is my sister Joyce. That is my brother Phil, and this is my brother Jerry. And then after all four of those rascals were born, I came along. So I'm the youngest of 5 kids, and that's me right after I was born in April back in 1961. And after I was born, my dad had started a flying school with his brother in Clear Lake, Wisconsin. And after I was born, now he had 5 kids, and he decided he really needed some extra money. So he got involved with the Air Force Reserve. So he went back in the military. So he's no longer in the Navy. He went into the Air Force. And so he became a career military officer for the rest of his life. And part of that Air Force Reserve job that he had required us to move. So we immediately, after he took that job, we moved to St. Paul, Minnesota, and then we moved to Manchester, New Hampshire, and then we moved to Utica, Michigan, then we moved to Columbus, Indiana, then we moved to San Rafael, California, and then Fairfield, California, and then finally Tacoma, Washington. That was where, by the time I got to Tacoma, I was in 6th grade, and my dad stayed there and finished out his career there and ended up retiring there. So I went from 6th grade all the way through college out in Washington State. And that's kind of what I call home, even though I moved all over the country as a kid. So part of being a military family and moving so much, we were moving and going to different schools all the time. So you had to make new friends very fast. So, and I also had a lot of time where in between moves where I was, had to entertain myself. So I found the way I loved to entertain myself was drawing. And this is one of my very first self-portraits. It was Easter and my mom wanted to get me a new suit for Easter. And I had been a huge fan of the Monkees TV show, and these guys, the Monkees all wore these really cool double-breasted blue blazers with turtlenecks. And so I wanted to have that to wear to Easter. So I drew a picture for my mom to show her the kind of suit I wanted. And so that was my first illustration. I was actually doing a piece of artwork to try and explain something to another person. So that's what I consider, I probably would consider this my very first illustration. But all those other things that you saw flashing up, those are all the things that I was interested in as a kid. One of the other things I was super interested in as a kid was cars. My dad, his hobby was like working on cars. So he was like a shade tree mechanic, and he loved to restore old cars. And so we would always go to car shows, and both my other two brothers, Jerry and Phil, were also super into cars. And they would draw pictures as well. And one day when I was in 1st grade, I was waiting for the bus, and I noticed my brother had his books. My brother Phil had his books on the stairway ready to go to school that morning. And he had drawn a picture of this hot rod that looked just like this on the cover of one of his books. We used to have to put brown paper over our books at school in order to keep them nice, because you'd have to turn them in at the end of the year. So he drew some pictures on his. And I looked at that thing, and as I was looking at it, I realized that, his drawing was really made up of just 3 geometric shapes. And it was circles, rectangles, and triangles. So I thought about it, and I started really analyzing it. And if you could just put all those shapes together as you're drawing it in a certain way, you would actually draw a real thing. So I discovered, just by using these geometric shapes, I could really draw more realistic things. And that was like a huge revelation to me. So I ended up in 1st grade, and one of the very first weeks of class, we had to sit in these clusters of 4 desks. And I sat with this little guy, Joey, here, and this was Steve here. And then this girl who sat across from me I just thought she was the most beautiful person in the world. And I immediately fell in love with her. Her name was Diane Ballemeister. And one day Diane said, I think we should have a drawing contest, and I'm going to like whoever draws the best picture. And I thought, oh, okay, I got this. And so I said, well, what do you want us to draw? And she said, I want you to draw a car. And so this was Joey's car, this was Steve's car, and this was my car. And she immediately fell in love with my drawing. And I thought, oh my God, this blew me away. I can draw a picture that actually influences people. And, all of a sudden, I had this friend who really loved the work that I was doing. So I thought, wow, that's crazy. This is amazing. So our actual love affair lasted just that recess. We played some tetherball, and then she moved on to other people after that. But still, I came away from this whole experience knowing that, yeah, my drawing actually has some power. I can make friends with it. And from that day forward, I started to draw even more, and actually, thought about pursuing it as something, later on in life. So I'm going to fast forward now to 8th grade. And this is my 8th grade geometry teacher, Mrs. Robinson. And one day in class, Well, it's the same situation with my brother. We got our geometry books the first week of class. I put my brown paper over it. I went home and did my homework that night. And after I got my homework finished, I started doodling on the brown paper. And so I drew this picture of my teacher on my cover of my book. I was really into skateboarding in those days, so I decided to draw Mrs. Robinson on the skateboard. And so I went to class the next day and sat down, and James Hafford, the guy who sat next to me, just started cracking up laughing and started to make a lot of noise when he was laughing. Then other kids started laughing at it as well. And next thing I know, Mrs. Robinson comes over, takes one look at the book, and then takes it away, and then goes up to her desk, and that was it. She never said anything, but I didn't have my book anymore. So the next class that I went to in 8th grade, I sat down at my desk, and there's a knock at the door after the class started. And the hall monitor came in and handed a note to my English teacher, and she looked at the note and said, "Charlie, you need to go see the guidance counselor immediately." And so I was a really good kid, and I never had gone to the guidance counselor before. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is horrible. I must be in serious trouble. And I was shaking as I walked down to his office. And so he asked me to come in, told me to sit down, and he reached over behind his chair, and there was my book. He picked it up, he looked at it, he laughed a little bit, and then he took the book cover off and threw it in the trash, and he just handed me my book, and he said, "Don't ever do this again." So I didn't really get in too much trouble. That was the extent of the admonishment there. But I learned a huge lesson. I decided, okay, with this skill or power or whatever it is that drawing is that I possessed, I also had the ability to offend people. And I wanted to make sure that if my drawing offended people, it wasn't someone that I respected. And I did respect Mrs. Robinson a lot. She was the one who was actually teaching me, about geometry, which is a huge part of my drawing skills, learning about how squares and rectangles and triangles and how to design things with geometry so that it works together. And just all of that magic that geometry has inside of it. How could I, offend this person again with my drawing? I didn't want to ever do that again. So I just knew that from now on, okay, I'm going to be careful with the things that I draw. If I'm not going to use it in a bad way. So then we moved forward into high school, and I was super lucky in Lakewood, Washington, where I went to high school. It was Lakes High School, that my particular high school had a special art class for commercial art. And I applied to get into it, and I got into it, and it was our senior year of school, and we got to have 2 periods twice a week and just do art, and specifically commercial art. So it was graphic design and illustration for the whole year, and it was awesome. And so that particular art teacher, Mr. Murphy, introduced me to a lot of really awesome things and how it all worked in the real world. Anything from cartoons, I was a huge fan of Disney and Warner Brothers, Bugs Bunny, Donald Duck, Bullwinkle. Charlie Brown was another huge influence on me. The Far Side. Gary Larson was a Tacoma person, and also, I loved his sense of humor. And also part of this art class is we really focused on art history and how that influenced commercial art. So I got exposed to art in a more kind of academic and more serious way. Also was a huge fan of Mad Magazine growing up. I loved all the different comics that were part of that, all the satire that was part of that. I was a huge fan of Johnny Quest. And again, hot rods still were part of my life. My sister went on to marry this guy, Sonny Alexander, who was also a hot rod nut, and he helped me learn all about restoration of interiors of the cars. He helped me restore the interior of my first car. And so I also love the whole hot rod culture and all the paint schemes that are involved. Architecture was also a big thing that I was really interested in. For 3 years, we lived in Columbus, Indiana, and that was a small town in Indiana, but it had this huge industry called Cummins Engine, where they make diesel engines for all types of different vehicles. And anyway, the owner and founder of that company was an architecture fan. And so he used the money that he had for the town in order to establish this kind of look for the town. Anytime they would have a public building like a church or a library or a hospital, he would fund an international search for an architect to design those buildings. So in this tiny little Midwest town that was surrounded by farmland, you would find the coolest mid-century modern architecture there. I encourage you, if you ever get a chance to go to Columbus, Indiana and check it out, you really should. Also a huge fan of literature. I love Moby Dick. My uncle had a Rockwell Kent illustrated book at my grandparents' house that every time we would go, I would just pore over the illustrations that Rockwell Kent did. I was also a huge fan of literature. In high school, I was really exploring all the Kurt Vonnegut novels. Also a huge fan of music. This is a Yes album cover that had kind of a surreal feel to it. Also was like a big influence on me growing up. And then Rene Magritte, surrealist. So again, the art classes that I had, and having such a dedicated instructor and kind of curriculum really kind of made me think about art in a much more serious way in high school. And then finally, I was a huge fan of the New Yorker cartoons, and specifically Peter Arno. I just love his drawing style. And it's kind of the loose pen and ink with kind of a washy gray tone to it. The other thing I was really interested in was graphic design. And in that class, I was learning about logos and typography. And I think one of the things that part of my family life growing up, I went to a lot of airports and just waiting for my dad to either taking him away or taking him to an airport to go away on a trip, or picking him up at an airport. And so I loved going to airports and looking at all the graphics that you see. The next time you go to an airport, just take a look when you walk around at all of the actual signage and typography that you see that's usually done by very expensive designers and very talented designers. Some of the best corporate design you'll ever see is in airports. And so I was really studying that and looking at that and thinking about how can I make my way into that world. The other thing Mr. Murphy exposed us to was a lot of the underground comics that were going on in the late 60s and the 70s. This was the later 70s when I was in high school, so a lot of that stuff still was out there. And this is Robert Crumb, one of his pieces. And finally, this guy, part of that design class and illustration class that I had in high school, Mr. Murphy would bring in magazines that were geared specifically to design and illustration, communication arts, graphice, print magazine, and in those magazines, we got a chance, we didn't have to subscribe to him. He would bring in all these magazines and have them in our little library in the classroom. And so I would pore over the issues that would come in. And in every single issue of Graphice, there would be a rapidograph ad. A rapidograph is a technical pen, an ink pen that illustrators would use. And in those ads, they would always have a drawing done by some sort of illustrator. And they almost always had a Murray Tinkelman drawing. This is a Murray Tinkelman drawing from one of those ads where he did these elaborate kind of combinations of animals and machines. And so I absolutely fell in love with his technique and the imagery that he created. And so I always thought in the back of my mind, you know, this is the kind of work I really want to do. I really want to illustrate like this. So after high school, I met this lovely lady, and it turned out we just happened to be going to the same college together. So we ended up dating all through college at Washington State University. And it was a fantastic time. And right after we graduated, we got married and decided to move to Virginia to be closer to her parents. Her parents were still in the military, and her dad was in the Air Force and stationed at the Pentagon. So we decided to move out there to be closer to them. And we settled down, had an apartment first, and then we bought a house. And I got a job as a designer in Alexandria, Virginia. And shortly thereafter, we started having babies of our own. So this is my son, Lucas, and this is our daughter, Carson. And they were a huge kind of treasure that that happened to fall into our laps that we absolutely loved. And I started working in the design studio, and my wife was working at an ad agency. So we were kind of both involved in the same type of industry. And so it was a great place to get started. And this is the type of work I was doing at the design studio. I started out as a graphic designer and then worked my way up to become an art director there. And so we were doing brochures, posters, logo design, advertisements, booklets, some books. This Sparky the fire dog here was a client of ours, the National Fire Protection Association, and Sparky is their mascot. And this was back in the early 80s, I think like 1985, 86 maybe. Anyway, we had done some ads for them, and they came to us asking if we would redesign their character because he hadn't been updated since the 1960s. And so Marcia, our creative director, she also was an illustrator, and she dove into the project thinking, oh, I really want to redesign Sparky. And turned out they didn't like her designs. They didn't like her illustrations. And so Steve, our account supervisor, came to me and said, Charlie, why don't you give it a shot? So I did this version, and they loved my Sparky. And so that started a relationship with myself and National Fire Protection Association that still goes on today. I still do Sparky work for them throughout, over the years. I'll do coloring books, and they have Fire Prevention Week where they'll put out special publications for kids and fire safety. So I was doing lots of design work here, but also this illustration and the Sparky stuff kind of got me more involved in doing illustration. So I was doing the illustration work here and designing this poster, this is a website design that I did for like a banner for a website that they had later on. This is a coloring book cover. This is an activity book puzzle that you had to find all the different fire safety hazards that exist in this thing, in this image. So I was doing a lot of illustration and thinking, oh man, I'm really digging this. Maybe I could just become a freelance illustrator. And so I decided to put together some samples and send them out in the Washington, D.C., Baltimore area to people that I thought would buy my type of illustration. And I started to get work. I started to do work for the Washington Post, their editorial illustrations. And through that, this Mary Hickey and Sandra Solomons, they were writers for the Washington Post. They had written their own book called The Working Mother's Guilt Guide, and they contacted me to illustrate their book. And so that was my first real book illustration. It was filled with a color cover, but all the inside illustrations were just black and white. And there were little spot illustrations for all the chapters and thrown in throughout the book. And so that was kind of my first experience working with a major publisher. It was Penguin, and working with editors and working with the writers and working together to create this book. And it was really fun. And I thought, this is what I want to do. So I made the leap. I quit my job and started doing freelance illustration full time. And we had a tiny house in Alexandria, and by now our kids were getting bigger, and I had my little studio in one of the bedrooms, and we really needed a bigger space to work and live in. So my wife's mom's family was from Lancaster County in Pennsylvania, and they kept telling us we should move up there. So we decided to make the big jump and move out of the DC area and move to Pennsylvania. And we bought this old house. It didn't look like this when we bought it. We ended up spending a lot of time fixing it up and painting and remodeling and all that stuff, but it was a lot of fun, and it was a great place to raise our kids. And so I had a studio on the left-hand side. Behind that tree, there's a window up on the second story in that little addition on the left-hand side, and that was my studio. And it was a great place to work. And so I started to do work for a lot of kids magazines. This was the work, a piece for Clubhouse magazine for kids. And there were puzzles, kind of like a Where's Waldo type thing. You had to find all the things that began with the letter B. And I'm still working traditionally here. I wasn't really working in a digital format yet. It was all pen and ink and watercolor. There's another one, the Olympics were happening. And so they had me do kind of this crazy, odd Olympics with all these weird things you wouldn't normally see at a track and field meet. And I thought that was fun. And I was also kind of like working into this like 3/4 aerial view into my illustrations, which kind of became the thing for me. And it was after that my wife, Tracy, had started working at Pennsylvania College of Art and Design, and they offered classes for the community. And so I started to take some computer classes, digital illustration classes and digital design classes, just because I knew, okay, this computer thing, it's going to happen. And I bought a computer just to use for my mailing list and my communications with clients, and to keep track of my bills and all that. But I always knew that, okay, I really should figure out how to do my work digitally. So taking some classes at the college got me into actually experimenting more and doing work for clients. So this was a piece that I did in Adobe Illustrator. Right after I took my class, I got a job with Scholastic. There was a series of flashcard illustrations, so I decided to do them in Adobe Illustrator, and they really liked it, and so I just kind of took off from there. So that had me doing more of these kind of aerial views. I made some friends with some designers in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. There's a group called Fathom Design Studio, and this was a brochure. Well, actually, it was a poster that was inside of a bookstore. The bookstore is called Midtown Scholar in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. If you ever get a chance to go to this bookstore, I highly recommend it. It's fantastic. It's in a giant old department store. And the thing was, the store was so big and they had so many books there, they needed a map in order to guide people to where all the different books are in the store. So that was my job, was to do an illustrated map of the store. So I loved this. This was a great kind of problem-solving project for me. And I did it both using my computer to kind of create a skeleton of the interior of the store, and then brought it into Photoshop to do all the drawing on top of kind of the skeleton of the layout of the interior. And then that got me into doing like cutaway views of buildings. So here again, this is my love of architecture and illustration is kind of melding together. And so this was a project for the National Fire Protection Association. It was a kind of a big folding poster that when you unfold the whole thing, this is the inside, and it shows you where all the smoke alarms need to be installed in your house. Okay, so I'm in Pennsylvania and living and loving the whole world there. And part of where we lived in Pennsylvania was this little town called Mountville. It's just outside of Lancaster. And it's a tiny little town, and Walmart had yet to put any stores into that area of Pennsylvania yet. And they decided to build a store right in our little town of Mountville. And where they wanted to put the store was right across the street from the elementary school, which was like the absolute worst place to put that store. So I would go to all the meetings that the people who were protesting the store would go to. And after one particular township meeting, I was driving home and I had this idea for a cartoon that just popped into my head. And it was this one. And Walmart had these really fancy hotshot lawyers there trying to convince the town politicians that they really needed to have the store. And they kept saying, okay, you know, if you're not willing to do it here, we'll just move on to this East Lampeter town just across the county from here. Anyway, it felt like they were really rolling their way through our town. And so I drew this up and I sent it to our newspaper as my letter to the editor. And 2 days later, I got a phone call, and it was from the editor. And he said, hey, I got your cartoon. I want to run it, and I want to pay you for it. And if you have any more ideas, you know, just keep sending them to me. And I thought, oh, yeah, that's awesome. So here's this thing where my little cartoons are starting to influence people. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. And so that started a 20-year relationship where every week I got to do a cartoon that would appear in the Sunday newspaper. And so this was one of them that appeared in 2004. The school district was trying to decide whether or not they should have school uniforms. And so I came up with this idea because I noticed that my son and all his friends basically wore the same thing every day. Maybe they were different colors, but it was basically like a uniform. And so this was my idea. And it was funny, this particular cartoon, later on, I put it up on my website, and I also put it up on a cartoon sharing site where other publishers can go and buy cartoons from cartoonists. And so this cartoon has actually been republished I think like 20 some times all over the world. It's been published in Brazil and France and Germany and Canada. It's amazing how this is kind of a universal thing that happens all over the world, where teenagers like to wear the same thing. So here's just some more cartoons from my time with the newspaper. This is a Christmas theme. It's a Halloween theme. Seemed like when I went into a lot of different offices to talk to people about work, they would always have these Halloween stories about how they got dressed up even more so than their kids. And then I also was doing it's my dream to get a cartoon in the New Yorker. I haven't got it in yet, but maybe someday before I die, I'll get it in there. But this was one that I submitted a few years when we moved to Texas. And we have lots of alligators here in Texas. And we can walk out our door and walk in a park that's right next to our neighborhood here, and they have this giant alligator that lives in the lake there. So I thought this one was pretty funny. Okay, then I had a person that I used to work with in Alexandria. Her name was Bonnie Matthews, and she also became an illustrator. She started as a designer just like me and moved on to working as an illustrator. And she was doing a lot of work for the American Psychological Association, doing book design and illustration. And she recommended me to them when she was too busy to do some work. So that was a cool thing about artists and staying friends with artists. You will, if you get to know other artists and know the types of work that they do, you can recommend potential clients to them. And so I'm always happy that Bonnie recommended me to these folks because we did a lot of work together. So we did, again, this is another example of doing book illustration where you have to maintain a consistency with the characters in the book. There was probably, I think there was over 60 illustrations in this particular book. It was kind of a self-help book for kids who have ADHD. and there's puzzles and games in it that I got to design and illustrate. It was a lot of fun, and also kind of helped me to learn how to budget my time and, you know, keep on track and keep consistent with my drawing style over, you know, 60 some illustrations. So here's, that became a series of books. They're basically the Learning 2 books. And then finally I got this last one, Mind Over Basketball, which was a lot of fun, where I kind of got to experiment a little bit and introduce photography along with my illustration work. And I thought that turned out pretty cool. And part of this whole time, I told you my wife worked for Pennsylvania College of Art and Design in the administration offices. And I went in there one weekend when they were having an open house, and got introduced to Bob Hogertl, who was the chair of the illustration department at that time. And when he found out what I did, he said, "Oh, you should come in and show your work to our students." And I did that, and then it was really good experience. And he said, "You know, if you ever want to teach, I'd be happy to have you." And so that started a teaching career for me at PCAD that lasted a long time. And I strictly was in the illustration department. And this is some of the samples of my students' work there. When I was teaching there, I liked to kind of design my illustration projects to be more like real world projects that I did as an illustrator, where I would illustrate advertisements for companies and for businesses. So this was a series of ads, kind of like the bookstore that I told you about in Harrisburg. I created this fictitious bookstore that had books and music and coffee and movies, and would give my assignments to my students, where they would, I would act as the art director and do all the typography, and they would create the illustrations that would go with it. And here's a book cover illustration. I started teaching digital illustration at PCAD, and after I was doing it a long time. And this is an example of a Photoshop illustration that one of my students did that I thought turned out really cool. Another one, where another book cover, where I would give them fiction book covers, and this one actually was a children's book that was rewritten by a adult fiction horror story writer, Anne Rice. So I gave that as kind of an idea for the student to then interpret with their illustration. I thought this was a great one as well. So one of the things I would do every year would be to bring my students at the end of the year to my studio, and we'd have a picnic. We'd have usually a lunch with chili, and then I would take them up to my, we'd have a picnic outside, and I would take them up to my studio and show them all my work, show them how I set up my studio, let them, handle all the artwork, show them all the stuff that I did years ago, stuff that I'm working on now. It turned out to be a really great experience. And part of that experience at PCAD would be every year we did a field trip to the Society of Illustrators. This is one of the other good friends of mine, and also a professor there, Eric Fowler. And this was taken at the Society of Illustrators building in New York City, in Manhattan, where we would take our students every year on a field trip, where we would go there, see the show that was up in the gallery, and then have lunch, and then they would get to go to other museums for the rest of the afternoon. It turned out to be a great experience. And this was one of the very first times I went there. Was really kind of cool, because we got there early. We were setting up in the lunchroom. They were getting our tables ready for our lunch, and so Bob and I were having a coffee at the corner of the lunchroom there, where they had a bar set up with coffee and everything. And this man walked in, had a long gray ponytail, beard, a leather jacket, and he had Converse sneakers on, and he kind of looked like a biker. And he introduced himself to us And it turned out it was Murray Tinkleman and this guy right here. And my jaw almost hit the floor. I mean, he was the guy back in high school that I loved his pen and ink drawing so much. I mean, he inspired me to become an illustrator. And so we spent the next hour talking to him, and he told us all about this program that he had started at Syracuse University. It was a Master of Arts program that was geared to working illustrators. And within 10 minutes, he had me totally sold on the program. I was ready to sign up that day. And so I signed up. I spent the next 3 years working with the program at Syracuse. It was kind of cool because it was set up for working professionals who were also teachers, where we would meet in Syracuse in the summer for 2 weeks, and then we would meet in the fall in New York for a week at the Society of Illustrators. We would have lectures every day, and we'd get to go to shows and meet other illustrators that were in New York. And then in the springtime, or yeah, that was in the fall. In the springtime, we would go to some other city and do the same thing. One spring it was Dallas, Fort Worth, and the other spring it was San Francisco. So we got to travel all around the country, meet illustrators who were working in all those cities, and it was a fantastic experience. These are all my classmates who I'm still friends with today, and absolutely just cherish my relationships with all these folks. So, Texas. After our kids grew out of high school, went to college, then moved out of the house, our son took his first job in Houston, Texas. He was the tugboat captain. And he got married and started having babies. And my wife and I felt like really alone in Pennsylvania, and we really wanted to be part of our grandkids' lives. So we decided to make the next big jump and move to Texas. This was end of 2015, early 2016. And these are our grandkids. It's missing one. I have to get a new photograph in here, but we haven't had a chance to get all of them in a photograph yet. Our daughter has 2 boys now. This is her boy, Charlie, and this is our son's oldest, Hoyt, and this is Scout, his oldest daughter, and this is Houston, his baby daughter. So we are now grandparents, and we love every single minute of it. So part of this move to Texas was, okay, I had to start finding clients in Texas. So I did what I always do. I start to create artwork kind of based on my experiences that I'm having at the time. And Texas was a very, very different place than I've ever lived before. And so I started to create illustrations that I would send out to businesses, editors, potential clients, and try and network as much as possible to let people know the type of work that I do. And pretty soon I started to get projects from people here. This was a piece that I did about the highways here in Texas. If you ever come to Houston and start driving around, you'll notice they have massive highways here with tons of traffic, but they seem to be able to figure out how to design them so that they work pretty well. But this is an Adobe Illustrator piece that I did, and got some attention from a few people. This was a map that I did, a little town in Richmond, Texas. We met this couple that have a coffee shop there called Blockhouse Coffee. And when she found out what I did, she asked me to draw this map of the historic area of this little town that they have their shop and they live in. And so that was the beginning of a great relationship with Blockhouse. And through that, we did some coffee mug illustrations with another person who has a Fort Bend County website that he wanted to promote some of the cities, the older cities within Fort Bend County. So here's architecture in Sugar Land, and then Richmond, and then Rosenberg, Texas. These are all kind of older Texas towns that are on the outskirts around Houston. And that kind of got me hooked up with the city of Sugar Land. After some people saw those little coffee mugs, I got approached by the city of Sugar Land to do a mural at the rec center. So this is the mural that I did for the rec center. This thing's probably, oh, I think it's about 30 feet wide. It's huge and it's really fun. Took me a while to do this in Illustrator. Again, kind of focuses on my love of architecture. And then here's another mural. After the Blockhouse people saw that mural, they had me create a mural for their new store in Katy, Texas. And then we did some graphics for the outside. And then the other thing that I wanted to focus on when I was in moved to Texas was I really wanted to try and write my own children's books. So I got involved with the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. I joined the local chapter here in Houston. They happened to have a conference that first year I joined. And so I put together some ideas for some books that I had kind of rolling around in my mind, one of which was Little Lunch Truck. This is the very first sketch that I did of the truck. And that whole story came about on a bike ride that I took with my grandson, where we were driving through their neighborhood. There was a lot of homes under construction there. And so we stopped to have a snack and watch all the construction vehicles working at this big site. And they were crazy busy. And all of a sudden, as we're watching, this little food truck came into the scene and all that commotion stopped. All the big bulldozers, all the cement mixers, all the dump trucks stopped. And all these people got out and ran over to the lunch truck. And again, it was like this one little thing influenced all those people. And so our grandson was really kind of blown away by it. And when I came home that day, I told Tracy about it. And she said, that sounds like a good story for a kid's book. So I wrote it out and I showed it at the conference and people really responded to it. It was really cool. And so that gave me the courage to start sending it out to agents in the publishing industry. And sure enough, I got an agent after about maybe 3 weeks of sending samples out. And that agent got me a publisher. So these are some of the interior illustrations of the lunch truck. And then that same agent found me another project with Rand McNally where we were doing maps, a whole series of books teaching kids about maps and waterways and landforms and roads. So again, these are Adobe Illustrator illustrations. Had a lot of fun doing these. I didn't write any of these books, I'm just illustrating. But the cool thing is, I don't know if you noticed, down in these book covers, they were written by a woman named Elizabeth Bennett. And she will come into the story a little bit later. So these are more interior illustrations from those books. So I'm super happy with the way things are going. I love, my relationship with the agent that I have. She's based out in California. Her name is Jill Cochran. And so this is part of my son's earlier job as a tugboat captain. One of the things when the company would buy a new boat, they would always christen the boat. So they'd have this huge party and we would get to go and walk around the boats. So that kind of inspired me to do this book. It was Tugboat, which I wrote it and illustrated it. I sent it to my agent. She loved it too. And she approached some publishers with it. And one particular publisher thought it was great. And they decided it was a wonderful book, but they wanted to change the name. And so I was kind of a little upset by that because I really liked the way I wrote it. And I liked the tug, kind of reminded me of the engine noise that a tugboat makes. But I was like, okay, let me think about it. And these are interior spreads from that book. And so they sent me a list of names that they had thought of, and they knew, okay, the boat was a female. And on the list, the very first name was Scout. And that just happens to be the name of our first granddaughter. And so I thought, oh, it has to be it. this has to be the name of the book. So it became Scout the Mighty Tugboat. And that was awesome. Again, that's another interior illustration from that. And so then another story kind of popped in my brain. I was hanging out with my grandson this time. He had had a play date with a friend of his named Ben. And he just kept talking about everything they did that day. And he kept, every time he would start a sentence, it was, my friend Ben, my friend Ben, my friend Ben. And I just loved the way that sounded. And I just thought, oh, I've got to do a story about these two little guys who are so busy. And I thought, well, I want to make them into animals. And the busiest animal I know is a beaver. And so I turned them into beavers. And so I did these drawings and I dummied the whole thing up, sent it to my agent, and she really, really liked it. And so she started shopping it around to publishers. And then I was waiting for a while, and then I get this email, and it's from Jill, my agent, and it was titled Good News and Bad News. And I said, oh no, I'm afraid to open the email. And it turned out the bad news was she was folding her artist representation company. She was decided to take another job. And the good news, she said, was, I found you another agent already, and I think you'll like her. And so it turned out to be Elizabeth Bennett, that person who wrote that book that I had illustrated the year before. She was also an agent, an artist representative for a transatlantic company that's based in Canada. And so, okay, I thought, and I talked to her on the phone. She seemed really, really great. And I thought this could work out. And she loved Chip and Ben as well. And so she knew right away who to send it to. And she sent it to Albert Whitman and Company. They loved it as well. And then next thing you know, it was a real book. And that became a series of books. But here's some interior illustrations from the first one. This is, they love to build forts, and they love to swim. And then the publisher loved the first book so much, they decided, okay, we really think this could be a series. So they gave me a contract for 3 more books. And so then I had to get busy writing again. And the next book I had, this was based on experience I had as a kid. My friend Pat and I used to build forts in my backyard. And then we'd spend the night in our backyard and get our flashlights and read our comic books and eat snacks and stuff and just have a blast. And so that I wanted to have, that's kind of a similar story with Chip and Ben. And then I wanted to do another one because I loved swimming so much. I decided, okay, I'd really like to do one where they have a race across the pond that they live in. So that was the third one. And then this is the fourth one that actually was coming out this coming fall. It's all about my friend Ben and the first snow. And this is kind of based on my memories of experiences with my family, where we started out, remember, back in Wisconsin, where you had nasty snow. You know, the winters were very, very long and cold and very snowy, but we always had fun there. And then when we moved to California, my parents would always rent a cabin at Thanksgiving up in the mountains near Lake Tahoe, so we would be around snow again. And it just, those memories really stuck with me, and I have this kind of fondness for the very first snow of the year and what that's like. And so that's what that story is all about. So that's basically the end of my talk, and I kind of have these certain rules that I live by and I want to share with people. And rule number 1 is that being an illustrator is really hard work. It may seem really fun, but there is a lot of hard work that's involved, both in self-discipline to make sure that you get up every day and go into your studio and you set out a list of things to get accomplished that day. Also, you need to find your clients and develop relationships with those clients. That's also hard work. It can be fun. I'm blessed with a lot of really great clients that I enjoy being around and I'm friends with. But just know that it's not all just fun and games, you know, that you're just all drawing pictures and it's happy time. It's also a lot of hard work. Never stop learning new things. One of the cool things about being an illustrator is every new project is like a new project. It's something new to learn. And when I was doing magazine illustrations, the articles were always about something completely different. And so I have to read them, learn about them, and then figure out a way to interpret them with my artwork. So I was always learning new things, and I was always, constantly reading about things that I have never experienced before. Be good to your tribe. What I mean by that is be good to all these people that you're involved with. You'll never know when those people might help you farther down the line. Like my experience with Bonnie Matthews and our working together and developing a relationship where we could give each other contacts with clients and be able to set up working relationships with people that I would never have met before if I hadn't known Bonnie. Just always be, conscious of this fact that all these relationships you're having every day, friendships that you make, will somehow or another, come back to you later on. So be part of this artist tribe where you're advocating for creative people. And lastly, is being an illustrator is hard work. Don't ever forget that. I mean, it is very difficult. So that's it. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I went a little beyond what our 4:45 or 5:45 talk time was supposed to end, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. I'm also, you can go to my website and contact me through there if you find you have any other questions that you didn't think about, or think about them later on after we shut this down.
Thank you so much, Charles. I just had one question. What's next for you?
Yeah. Let me get out of here. There, should be back. Yeah, I actually got some really great news today. I got an email that I have a 5th Chip and Ben book that I had been writing and working with the editor for the last 3 weeks, going back and forth, trying to get the story just right. And just got the message from her today that it passed through the final manuscript review at the publishing house. So that means it is going to be a book. And so now I got to get started on the illustrations. And the other thing is I'm working on a completely different book. It's called Peach's Pumpkin Seed. And it's about a witch and her trip to the beach. And that I just finished putting the whole dummy together. I've written it. And with that book, I've been working with my agent, Elizabeth, and she's been helping me kind of edit the story a little bit. The hardest part about writing for kids is knowing which words to take out and which words to keep in. I end up writing way too much. So I have to go back in and really figure out, okay, is that really something I need to say, or will it be in the illustration, something that someone's going to see? I don't really have to talk about the bright blue sky when it's going to be in the illustration. So that's where having a relationship with an editor or your agent and having a really good working relationship with those people and trusting them, trusting each other is very beneficial, and it really helps to make the story great. And that is one thing that I think a lot of people don't think about when they think about writers. They just think that, oh, this person, he or she, is locked up in their little office and they're typing away and creating this story, but it really is more of a team effort. You're always going to be working with editors who will help you because they have experiences that you don't have, and as far as the publishing industry goes. And so you have to trust them, and also, be willing to fight for your own creativity, your own creative choices. For some reason, you made that choice, so there's got to be a reason why. And if you feel confident or strong about it, you should tell them. But I'm really blessed that, excuse me a sec, I get to work with fantastic people who I really, really love. And it's just a joy to work with both Sue at Albert Whitman and Elizabeth.
Very
So
good.
that should be the next thing. I also have some, got contacted by a company here in Houston that wants me to create some artwork that is going to be in a new children's pediatrics center down in the south of Houston in a little town called Angleton. So I'm just kind of working out some of the details with the contract on that right now, but it should get started pretty soon.
Excellent. Well, thanks for letting me record. I'm going to stop right now and stop recording. And I thank you again. And I'm very excited to share this with like the graphic design department here at Bucks and also the language and literature faculty so they can share it with our students. So thank you very much. And I'll stop recording now.